It's one of the oldest creatures on Earth. So old, it's called a living fossil. Soon, it may be only a fossil. Yet one of the world's most endangered animals is also evolution's greatest success story. A story that begins far from Africa, in the day of the dinosaurs. Beneath the flatlands of Nebraska lies a layer of volcanic ash covering 1,000 square miles. Yet there are no volcanoes in Nebraska. The ash came from Idaho, 1,000 miles away, 10 million years ago. Lava was spewed for miles around, but worse than the blast was the fallout. A deadly cloud of ash floated over the land. Then it began to fall. In some places, several inches accumulated. In others, 10 feet. All life was suddenly frozen in a time capsule of gray ash. "10 million years later, the time capsule was opened. In 1978, Mike Voorhees of Nebraska University was prospecting for fossils in the ash beds of Verdigris Creek in eastern Nebraska. At the end of a fruitless day of searching, he looked up from the bottom of the creek bed and saw something on the bank. Against the gray ash, it gleamed white, like bone.
I came across a ravine that led to a volcanic ash bed perched high up on the wall, and I crawled up and saw, to my surprise, lower jaw of a baby rhinoceros sticking out of the bottom of this volcanic ash bed. I could see the tips of the upper teeth and figured that there was probably an entire skull there.
There was, and not only a skull, but an entire skeleton. Mike would soon learn that it was the find of a lifetime. Ecstatic, he dug deeper into the ash and found hundreds of rhinos. After 3 decades of digging at ashfall, his crew has uncovered a whole menagerie of ancient creatures.
I'm standing at the bottom of what was a water hole 10 million years ago, which got filled with volcanic ash from a distant volcano and snuffed out the lives of hundreds of animals, including the rhinoceroses that we see in front of us here. Each of these skeletons tells a story of life and death on the North American savanna.
One of the strangest creatures uncovered at Ashfall turned out to be the last of its kind, an entire race of rhinos that once lived in North America. Ashfall was later nicknamed Rhino Pompeii, after the ancient Roman city whose inhabitants were also wiped out by a volcano. Like them, these creatures lay preserved under a death mask of ash. Over time, rivers and rainfall have carved out hills and valleys here, yet the layer of ash extends evenly through the landscape. Mike Voorhees concluded that 10 million years ago, the land was flat and open. Across this savanna, roamed creatures now seen in Africa. Unlike their modern counterparts, ancient rhinos wandered in herds and congregated around waterholes, like ashfall. After the volcano erupted, a huge cloud made up of trillions of specks of ash covered the land. Each tiny speck was deadly. Its edges were serrated like a knife and just as sharp. When the animals around the waterhole inhaled the ash, it lacerated their lungs. Slowly, they were cut to pieces from inside, then covered up. As ashfall was excavated, the details of the disaster emerged. Then, so did another tragedy.
This is an especially touching association because we have a very young baby rhinoceros that had barely started eating solid food. It was probably less than a month old when it died. Next to it is this adult female, almost certainly its mother. We know it's a female because it has a small tooth or tusk at the front of the lower jaw. And adult females like this either have a baby inside them or next to them. So it's really quite a tragedy to think of literally hundreds of these animals dying a pretty agonizing death from lung failure caused by a volcano 1,000 miles away.
Yet the rhino turned out to be a survivor. Volcanoes, droughts, ice ages. Rhinos have taken everything nature threw at them and come back for more. Most species die out within 10 million years. Not the rhino. It's an evolutionary success story 50 million years old. The proof lies in North America. Here much of that story unfolded, and here the fossil record is most complete.
I think we have to respect the rhinos. These animals have been with us on the earth for millions and millions of years. They've come in a huge variety of shapes and sizes. They've managed to live in environments from tropical jungles to the Arctic tundra. I think they're an evolutionary masterpiece.
If the modern rhino is a masterpiece of evolution, where is the original design? The answer lies buried in the distant past, far back in the age of the dinosaurs. The African rhino has walked the earth for only 3 million years, yet its heritage stretches back to creatures more ancient. 65 million years ago, the world was coming to an end for the dinosaurs. One of the last was Triceratops, a plant eater that grazed across the plains of North America. Armed with 3 mighty horns and a crest as big as its head, it looked so forbidding that even T-Rex might hesitate to attack it. Its success lay in its design. It had a round body, so it was hard to attack. It had a cast iron stomach, so it could eat almost anything. It had short legs, so its center of gravity was low, and it had eyes set high on its head, so it could graze and keep watch at the same time. Triceratops was the rhino's prototype, but a whole line of knockoffs would follow before the first true rhino emerged. 30 million years ago, after extinction killed off Triceratops, the first proto-rhino appeared in Egypt. Arsinoitherium preserved traits from Triceratops, 2 mighty horns and 4 stout legs. Meanwhile, in North America, a similar creature evolved, the brontothere, or thunder beast. At 2.5 tons and 9 feet tall, it was the biggest plant eater on the continent. But nature's attempt to build a rhino now suffered a setback. The climate grew cooler and drier, and forests turned to grassland. Unable to live off the land, brontotheres disappeared. Even as they were dying out, their replacement was evolving. Hyrachias. It seemed a step backward. It was slender, not stout, long-legged, not short, and no bigger than a Great Dane. Yet it was the first true member of the rhino family. Over millions of generations, it would spawn 200 species of rhinos, from the miniature to the monstrous. Paraceratherium ruled Asia 30 million years ago. Today, it dominates the research of Don Prothero from the Occidental College of Los Angeles.
One of the most amazing of all the extinct rhinoceroses was a gigantic beast known as Paraceratherium. This animal lived in Asia from about 15 to about 35 million years ago, and it towered above the landscape, weighing in at about 20 tons and measuring about 18 feet tall at the shoulder. It was so huge it was about the size of many of the dinosaurs, and it had a lifestyle probably much like the giraffe, if you can think of our rhinoceros equivalent of a giraffe, living off the leaves of the tops of trees.
Although a far cry from Hyrachias, Paraceratherium still preserved the blueprint. Within its huge legs, it retained the long limbs and slender toes of its little ancestor. Paraceratherium was the largest mammal ever to walk the earth. Even the elephant was only 1/5 its size, and only Paraceratherium ever grew as big as a dinosaur. Like the dinosaurs, it too disappeared, but the rhino design lived on. 22 million years ago, the world went through another change in climate. In North America, dense forests shriveled up, giving way to open country, the American savanna. Unable to stomach the new vegetation, many creatures died out, yet one thrived. Rhinoceros had teeth like grindstones and a cast-iron stomach. It also sported a pair of horns, just like brontothere. Like its predecessor, Rhinoceros was eventually tested by nature. Around 19 million years ago, North America's warming trend heated up. The land was parched by an endless summer. Across the continent, thirsty creatures migrated in one direction, toward water. As more animals gathered, the herds grew larger, and the water holes grew smaller. When the last drops dried up, the forebears of the rhino fell dead, alongside primitive relatives of the horse and the pig. In 1904, one such graveyard was discovered in western Nebraska. Agate Springs is the largest find of rhinoceros bones in the world. Paleontologists estimate that 16,000 of these little rhinos died here, within just a few acres. How so many bones came to lie in one place was once a mystery, until it was solved by a paleontologist from Nebraska University's museum, Bob Hunt.
The most important clue in helping tell us something about how the rhinoceros came into the waterhole setting is that the teeth can be grouped in discrete age classes. We have jaws that have teeth representing babies, middle-aged mammals, and old adults. The only way that you could find discrete age classes in a mass of rhinoceros bones like this is if the rhinoceroses were all birthed at about the same time. So we think that this was a herd that came into the waterhole and died in this very shallow body of water over a period of just weeks to months.
The herd resurfaced on a cattle ranch. A cowboy found what looked like the petrified bones of Indian ponies. Instead, they were monoceros. With this bonanza of fossils, Bob Hunt has learned not only why monoceros died, but how it lived and what it looked like.
These were very long-legged rhinoceroses, perhaps a little more long-legged proportionally than the modern rhinos that the average person is used to seeing. These rhinos may have existed in herds very similar to zebra and wildebeest in East Africa today.
For several million years, monoceros was the sole rhino in America. Then, 18 million years ago, it vanished, just like its predecessors. A million years later, a new proto-rhino arrived from Asia, PaleoWorld. With its barrel-shaped body and stubby legs, it looked more like a hippo. On the path of evolution, PaleoWorld would be left by the wayside. The story of the rhino in North America ends in eastern Nebraska. Here lie hundreds of victims of a volcanic eruption in the mass graveyard called Rhino Pompeii. Uncovered by Mike Voorhees in 1978, it's one of the rarest fossil sites in the world.
I had no idea at the time that this would be the first of more than 200 skeletons that lay buried at the bottom of this ash bed.
PaleoWorld looked more like a hippo than a rhino, and acted like one too. It lolled around waterholes, sharing them with other beasts that seem more at home in Africa.
To a paleontologist, this is an amazingly interesting place to work. We have essentially a snapshot of a moment in time 10 million years ago, revealing things like the fact that rhinos and camels and three-toed horses lived here that probably most Americans have no idea of once inhabited our landscape. We're just scratching the surface here. The skeletons that we see before us in this building are less than 1% of the total fossil deposit. So I'm looking forward to finding out what is around the next bend of the waterhole.
What lay around the bend was the last step in the long odyssey of the American rhino. A new journey would begin and lead the rhino back to Africa. For almost 50 million years, the ancient rhino thrived in North America. Then, 5 million years ago, it suddenly disappeared. Mike Voorhees, who found the fossil graveyard of Rhino Pompeii, hunted for the answer. His search ended just 4 miles away at a gravel pit called Big Springs. With his wife Jane, Voorhees sought traces of rhinos. They found nothing, and that was the answer.
5 million years ago, glacial rivers began to deposit gravel like this all across the Great Plains. We know that the climate had changed. When we search these beds for fossils, we find no remains of rhinos or other critters that would have required a tropical climate. We therefore think that the Great Ice Age dealt the death blow to all North American rhinos.
Yet, once again, nature wasn't through with the rhino. The beast died, but the design survived. 100,000 years ago, during the last ice age, a new rhino appeared in Asia, on the cold steppes of Siberia, Elasmotherium. As big as an elephant, it had a skull almost 4 feet long and a horn more than 6 feet long. When the Ice Age ended 10,000 years ago, it melted away. Now, the rhino is making its last stand.
As a paleontologist, I can witness in the rocks the great success that rhinos have had on the planet Earth. It disturbs me deeply that we may be the last generation to see rhinos alive. My wife and I saw a single female rhino in Amboseli Park in Kenya a couple of years ago. It just broke my heart to think that these great creatures could perish from the earth, and we can do something about it.
Five species of rhino survived the slow walk into the present. Yet in our lifetime, poaching has driven the rhino to the brink of extinction. Poachers themselves are now fair game, yet the killing goes on. In our world, the rhino looks out of place, an artifact from a time long gone, a time only the rhino remembers.